An EPA estimate of MY20 full-line automaker fleet-wide fuel economy 2021 EPA Automotive Trends Report.
Live from historic Shepherdstown, West Virginia at the Bavarian Inn, it's time for the Education Policy Candidates Forum, sponsored by We the People of Jefferson County. Here tonight are Senator Hannah Geffer, incumbent for District 16, Delegate Jason Barrett, candidate for Senate District 16, Delegate Chuck Horst of District 91, Delegate Paul Espinosa of District 98, Delegate Wayne Clark of District 99, and Bill Reidenauer, candidate for District 100. Here's tonight's moderator, Mike Lowry.
Good evening and welcome to the Education Policy Forum for Jefferson County State Legislature candidates, sponsored by We the People of Jefferson County. Election Day is coming soon on November 8th, and education is a top issue for many West Virginia voters. We thank our candidates for joining this forum to share their views on the most pressing education issues of the day. Questions have been drafted by We the People, and candidates will have 2 minutes to respond, as well as 2 minutes for an opening and closing statement. I will indicate when candidates have 15 seconds remaining. With us this evening are Delegate Jason Barrett, candidate for Senate District 16, Senator Hannah Geffer, District 16, Delegate Chuck Horst for District 91, Delegate Paul Espinosa for District 98, Delegate Wayne Clark for District 99, and Bill Reidenauer, candidate for District 100. Thank you for being here, and we'll start with opening remarks, starting with Bill Reidenauer. The floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Bill Reidenauer. I'm the candidate for the Republican candidate for District 100 delegate. I'm a retired Marine. I'm also a retired Defense Intelligence Officer. I finished up my career at the end of in the middle of 2021 as the Chief of Strategic Policy and the Intelligence Directorate in the Pentagon. At that point, I had an opportunity to watch what the Biden regime had been doing at the national security level and its domestic policies. I was stunned at many of the things that it was doing within the national security arena, and also that it was doing within the domestic arena. And I decided that I could no longer continue to support that type of activity, both in the national security and domestic issues. So I decided that I would retire. I retired and decided that my wife and I were planning on traveling, but after a period of time, we decided that it was time to do something to help the country. I have 2 graduate degrees, one in economics, another in strategic policy. I have other graduate study that I've done for other institutions. My major in undergraduate degree was history. I believe that education is one of the most critical functions of our government, and I believe that we actually have to work much more seriously on our educational system within West Virginia. We are currently 49th out of 50 in terms of our educational quality. We're paying 22nd highest per student of all 50 states. I believe that that's an abysmal record, and we have to do something about trying to ensure that the children and our grandchildren have an educational system that's going to actually prepare them for life. I don't believe we currently have one, and I want to do what I can when I get down to Charleston in order to try and create a better educational system.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Delegate Clark.
First, thank you to We the People in WNR&R for hosting this event. Thank you to Mr. Lowry for being our moderator. My name is Wayne Clark, and I'm running for the 99th District. I've learned a lot. I've learned and accomplished a lot in my first 2 years as representative of West Virginia's House of Delegates. We have a tremendous delegation representing Jefferson County, and I'm very proud to be a part of this team. I've sponsored and co-sponsored 27 bills that became law in my first term. Each of those laws touches on key issues that are important to the future of the district of our state. From education to energy to protecting the Second Amendment to the rights of the unborn and supporting small businesses. I proudly worked to advance opportunities for all West Virginians. I've proudly supported a pay increase for our teachers and law enforcement, education choice for all West Virginians, students, so they can receive the education they need and thrive, and not be limited because of zip code or financial situation. Stronger online protection laws for our kids, removing regulatory barriers for our hospitality industry, and reducing their tax burdens. I hold a lot of titles: husband, dad, small business owner, employer, mentor, and you're representing the House of Delegates. I thank you for the faith you had in me, and I humbly ask for your support come November. Send me back to the House of Delegates. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Horst?
Hi, I'm Delegate Chuck Hurst.
I'm sorry. It was Delegate Espinoza. Sorry.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Well, good evening. I'm Delegate Paul Espinosa, running for re-election to the 98th Delegate District, and I'd also like to thank We the People and WRNR for hosting tonight's forum. As a longtime advocate for student-centered education, I'm pleased to be here tonight to share my record on supporting education choice and discussing the various topics regarding public education here this evening. I've been very pleased to sponsor and work for passage of various pieces of legislation as a member and a past chair of the House Education Committee. Was pleased to sponsor our first charter school legislation and also sponsored the most recent legislation that expanded that type of choice here in West Virginia. Was also pleased to co-sponsor our Hope Scholarship, which was very pleased to see the Supreme Court find that it was in fact constitutional to again provide options for our students that are prevalent across the country and in virtually all of our surrounding states. Again, look forward to discussing public education this evening, and I would appreciate your support on November 8th.
Thank you, Delegate Espinoza. Delegate Horst?
Thank you. Chuck Hurst, delegate for the elected delegate for the 62nd district. With redistricting, my new district is the 95th district. There was a little bit of a miscue there on the intro. And it's been an honor to represent the people. And I'd like to thank We the People and WRNR for the invite to this forum. And I do sit on the Education Committee in the House. And it's been a rather quick learning experience there. We've seen a lot wrong with the education system. I've been an advocate for school choice. I actually was a sponsor on the Hope Scholarship bill, which is now law after a court challenge going to the Supreme Court. The bottom line is, I think with our education system, we need to reimagine education, I think. What we've got has not been working for quite some time, and actually I believe has been continually deteriorating. And I think some of the policies that we have put forward recently are going to start making change in what we see in our education here in the state of West Virginia. Education is very critical. It's critical for even bringing businesses to the state, which will grow our economy. And growing our economy grows the tax base, tax revenue, which hopefully will allow us to start giving some money back to the people and cutting some taxes. I guess that's about all I have at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Hurst. Senator Geffer?
I'm Senator Hannah Geffer. I represent the 16th District. I am an educator. I taught at Shepherd College for over 20 years. All of my children, I've raised 8 children in my house, and they all went to Berkeley County public schools. They kept moving the line, so some of them graduated from Hedgesville and some of them graduated from Martinsburg, but they're all Berkeley County students. And I think our schools and education are the key to everything we do here. The schools are what really forms the community. And education is absolutely crucial. The first thing the businesses ask when they are thinking about moving to West Virginia is, how are your schools? So they are central to everything we're going to be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Delegate Barrett?
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you to We the People, and thank you to WRNR for hosting this event. My name is Jason Barrett. I currently serve in the House of Delegates in the 61st District. I live in Martinsburg with my lovely wife Summer and 6-month-old baby boy Berkeley. As I said, I've served in the legislature now for 8 years. My first 2 years in the House, I served on the House Education Committee. In the last 6 years, I've served on the House Finance Committee, where I've learned so much about our state's $4.6 billion general revenue budget. I have done everything I can on that committee to be an active member to pass legislation that is pro-taxpayer and looks at reducing spending and just provide good fiscal policy, conservative policy to our state's budget. Like some of my colleagues have said about education, we have an education system in West Virginia that is often too top-heavy, too Charleston-driven. I think we have to get back to empowering parents in their child's education and get away from such a centrally controlled education system. I think that most parents would agree that we're top-heavy for administration. We have class sizes that are too high. And so I think we talk about education funding a lot, and the answer isn't always more money. It's better use of money, and that's what I advocate for education policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, candidates, for your opening statements. For our first question, the West Virginia Supreme Court just ruled the Hope Scholarship Program constitutional. At issue was whether the program is detrimental to the efficiency of the public school system. Question for you is, do you believe the government programs that support education outside the public school system harm the efficiency of public schools? Noting this legal challenge, should the legislature limit the Hope Scholarship Program or similar government initiatives to prevent harming the efficiency of the public school system, and if so, how? Starting with you, Delegate Barrett.
Thank you for the question. I agree with the court's decision. I think it's really easy when someone opposes a piece of legislation that passes. The easiest thing to do is just call it unconstitutional. You can make the case that you don't particularly like the Hope Scholarship, but it is constitutional. The concern that I have with the Hope Scholarship moving forward is that it currently is not open to all students. Right now, it is open to those students in our public schools. So current homeschool students would not qualify for the Hope Scholarship unless they enroll into public schools. So moving forward, I think the change to the Hope Scholarship should be to open it up to all students, and I certainly support any measure that creates a level playing field for all of our students in West Virginia to have equal opportunity for all of them. I think that's just important. When you're talking about education, it's important to treat every student fairly. I think that this idea that that giving parents choice is somehow anti-public education. These two things don't fight one another. I think that empowering parents, giving them options for what best suits their family and their child is absolutely the route that we should take.
Thank you, Delegate. Senator Geffer.
We have approximately $4,300 per student for scholarships. That's not the parents' share that they have paid into taxes. It's all of our shares that we have paid into the tax that now a number of people would like to see pulled from our public schools. The state is required to have a thorough and efficient education, and we do that through our public schools. If parents want to send their children to private schools, that's fine. That's prerogative. It's their prerogative to do that. But I think we need to really think about, are we really going to balkanize our public schools so that we're going to have a situation where children just go to school with children exactly like themselves? And I think one of the wonderful things about our school system is that you have all the children in the community, or a majority of the children in the community, all going to school together, meeting each other, knowing each other, and I think that's one of the things that really helps to build a community. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Delegate Hurst.
Thank you. I do agree with my colleague here, Delegate Barrett, that if there was a change to the Hope Scholarship Program, that it would be to open it up to more students, the ones that are not eligible due to the way the legislation was currently drafted. I think that would be a big positive. I think, like I mentioned a minute ago, I think we need to reimagine education in West Virginia. What we have does not work for everybody. There's given options for different children is going to be a big plus, and I think Our outcomes are going to improve. The idea that we're taking money away from public schools, I don't really agree with that. And what we're doing is we're simply allowing that portion of money that would normally be spent on that child for public education to be used by the parent for something different rather than the normal public school. And there's many options out there. My understanding, many of our private schools in this area are in around the $5,000 range for a student to attend. So with the availability of the Hope Scholarship, that would allow parents that at the lower end of the income brackets the option to have something different for their child. I believe some of what goes on in our schools comes down from the federal level that we can't control, that causes bad outcomes in some of our public schools, and that would be our disruptive students. As I understand it, we're very limited to how we can deal with disruptive students in the public school system. So going forward, I believe the school choices will give us a much better outcome for educating our children in West Virginia. And thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Espinoza.
Thank you, Mike. As a co-sponsor of the Hope Scholarship legislation, I took my responsibility seriously to help craft legislation that indeed was constitutional, and was certainly pleased with the affirmation of the West Virginia Supreme Court that in fact allowing additional options for students and parents is constitutional here in West Virginia. While it's true that those students and parents who take advantage of the Hope Scholarship will receive a little over $4,000, I think some opponents' criticism of that ignore the fact that somewhere in the range of $8,000 remains with the local school district, despite the fact that a student has chosen an option that better fits their needs. And I think it's, I think it's a little silly, frankly, to assume that every student learns the same way. Certainly, parents and students should be able to choose options that best fit their needs. When I first was elected to the legislature back in 2012, I became aware of some of the options that other states had across the country, including programs like the Hope Scholarship, and began my work during my first term in the legislature as a member of the House Education Committee to begin to build support for this program, and was very excited again to see that legislation finally pass the legislature, and for West Virginia to actually go from last to first in the nation as far as providing additional opportunities for our students and parents. As far as refining the legislation, I would certainly consider expanding it to address some of the issues that my colleagues have mentioned. I think history shows that typically only less than 5% of students do take advantage of it, so I think that's something that I would like to expand beyond where we are today. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Clark.
Thank you. So you guys are all going to hear a common theme when it comes to me and my answers. I was a co-sponsor on this bill, and I strongly supported the bill coming out of education and on the floor. I think the Hope Scholarship is an opportunity for us here in the state of West Virginia to give many of the kids the options that they don't have, that they might not have because of where they live, where their school is, their transportation that they have. Here in the Eastern Panhandle, we have to understand is that we're very condensed. It's easy for us to get from one part to the other. Some other areas of our state, it's very difficult. So when a parent is having issues and they feel that they need to take their kid out of the public school system and do something else, whether it's homeschooling or whether it's a micro school or some sort of a small pod that many other areas do, or going into a faith-based education system, having that money for them to do it is so important because it can be used for so many things on the education side, and it's not going to cost the parents so much money. So other than making changes, any changes to the Hope Scholarship, the only thing that I would say is obviously opening up to more of our homeschoolers. We do have currently a 5% cap on it, of 5% of students that are eligible on an annual basis. Having that increase to say maybe 10%, giving more of our students an opportunity to take advantage of it is something that we should start looking at.
15 seconds.
Making some changes to our vendors in regards to how the vendors are approved also is something that's important, so that parents have options, especially parents who are taking advantage of it from homeschooling for physical education requirements, things like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Mr. Ridenhour.
I absolutely support the decision, the Supreme Court decision on the Hope Scholarship. I am a big advocate and want to be a proponent of school choice for our families and for the kids. They deserve a better educational system than we're currently providing to them. I believe also that we should be opening this up to more students and families in particular. And I believe we also should be trying to increase the amount of funding that will follow the student out to a different educational system. We have tremendous numbers of families who are homeschooling, and they believe that they need to homeschool because of some deficiencies we see within our public school system. Until we resolve our public school issues, many of these families are not going to return, and it's unfair to simply punish them by not allowing them to have some funding in order to offset the public school failures that we're currently seeing. I believe that actually if we do continue to expand those numbers in terms of the Hope Scholarship and those families that are allowed to exercise the option to take another school setting, we're going to decrease some of our class sizes. We're actually going to increase the ability of the teachers that are remaining, that have the remaining students, to expand the type of education that they will be getting, and hopefully we will improve our public school systems as well. I do believe that as we allow school choice, what we're doing is we're giving parents and families the opportunity to seek an environment for their students and their children that will be better for them and better for the student in order to develop as they go forward. Thank you.
Thank you all. Question number 2. On the ballot this November is a constitutional amendment that gives the legislature oversight authority over the State Board of Education. This amendment is listed as Amendment 4 on every voter's ballot. What do voters need to know about Amendment 4, and how will you vote on Amendment 4? Starting with you, Mr. Ridenhour.
Well, as far as how I vote for Amendment 4, I'll vote definitely yes. The state legislature is the representative of the people, and it needs to be the entity that is determining what all of the state government is focused on. The state Board of Education is the only part of the state government that is not putting its rules and policies past the legislature, just like the rest of the state government. We have to have a state government that is treated the same throughout. I believe that we need to focus more on determining whether or not the policies and rules that the state school board is engaged in are actually benefiting our educational system and not serving as a vehicle for what certain unions are trying to push in their agenda. I also believe that we need to ensure that those rules and policies are going to benefit our overall educational system. So, and what we don't see is an educational system that is improving rapidly. We see some improvements in local areas, but we need to rapidly improve our entire educational system. Our state is growing. We have to have an educational system that's going to support that growth, and we have to make sure that the educational system that we're developing is actually preparing our kids for the type of environment they're going to face in both a work environment and a life environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Clark.
Amendment 4, House Joint Resolution 1 in 2021, which I co-sponsored, House Joint Resolution 102 in 2022, which I co-sponsored. So yes, I'll be voting yes on Amendment 4. I co-sponsored both bills that got it here. Education oversight, and I said this back in 2020 when I was running, that the state of West Virginia has 4 branches of government. and education being the fourth. And we need to take that and rein it back in. The education department is the only department that does not have rules oversight by the legislature, and it needs to be done. I can give you some examples of situations where there are bills that passed this year that were supposed to be implemented this year that teachers have not been trained on, that teachers have not gone through the mandatory training. One of those is very important to me. Megan's Law. Was supposed to have mandatory training for all teachers and all first-year teachers this year, but the Board of Education has not gotten that training out yet. The deadline for that was in September. So everybody understands and knows locally about how passionate I was for Megan's Law, and it was a little disappointing to see that it wasn't put into effect. Us, the legislators, should have the option of putting that in effect, because that is what we're here for. We're here to make sure that the education system is doing what the people want. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Clark. Delegate Espinoza.
Thank you, Mike. As the lead sponsor of House Joint Resolution 102, I certainly not only intend to vote for Amendment 4, but also urge its passage. And I think it's important to recognize, as my colleagues have mentioned, that our State Board of Education is essentially the only executive agency that is not subject to having its rules and regulations that it promulgates subject to legislative review, whether it's the Department of Health and Human Resources, Department of Transportation, even higher education, our Higher Education Policy Commission. Those rules routinely come before the legislature, because when we enact a legislation, it typically comes with it a grant of rulemaking authority for that agency, with the proviso that those rules and regulations, once promulgated, must come back before the legislature, so that the legislature can confirm that those rules and regulations are consistent with state law. We do that routinely with every state executive agency, with the exception of the State Board of Education. And I think it's helpful perhaps to understand a little bit of the history. This was not always a partisan issue. As a matter of fact, back in 1988, the West Virginia legislature, under Democratic control, amended the State Administrative Procedures Act to essentially require that public education rules come before the Legislative Oversight Commission on Education Accountability, which I was pleased to co-sponsor here, or co-chair recently with Senator Rucker. However, a 1988 Supreme Court ruling essentially exempted the State Board from presenting their rules. So this is really about accountability. Who do we want to be accountable for state public education? Do we want
10 seconds.
Do we want unelected bureaucrats to make that call, or do we want duly elected representatives to make that call? I suggest the latter. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Espinoza. Delegate Hurst.
Thank you. Kind of a tough act to follow. Everybody's kind of already said everything that I would have to say about this. I was a co-sponsor of this resolution in 2021. I certainly would have been a co-sponsor in 2022 as well. I'm not quite sure why. I guess it got filled up before I got an opportunity to sign on to the resolution. I think it's just simply common sense that we have some oversight over the Board of Education, or the State Board of Education. I want to make that clear. It's State Board, not our local elected boards. I was in Education Committee, I was absolutely floored to hear attorneys refer to the State Board of Education as the fourth branch of government. Last I checked, we really only have 3 branches of government, and I will certainly be voting yes on this. I certainly encourage everybody to vote yes so that we have some oversight. I believe most states have this oversight, and West Virginia certainly has this oversight with all other agencies. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Senator Geffer.
Part of the problem with the relationship between the legislature and the public school system is you don't want your public school system to be totally politicized. and you don't want the legislature, for political reasons, to determine the details of not only how our children are taught, but what they are taught. We want to have our teachers be respected as the professionals they are. We lose teachers all the time to our surrounding states. Why? One, because they pay more, but two, because we have some really good teachers. And I would send you back to what happened during COVID. Most of our teachers had no background in teaching over the internet, and yet they developed curriculum, they met with their students, they kept our education system going. So I think there is almost a mistrust of some of our teachers by our legislators that I find very disconcerting, because I think they are like the EMS workers for our children. And I think they should be respected and treated, as I said, the professionals they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Delegate Barrett?
Well, Mike, the question was, what can you tell voters? And I think the short answer to what to tell voters is that absolutely vote yes on Amendment 4. I think Senator Geffer is a tad confused when she talks about teachers. Teachers aren't writing these rules. Unelected bureaucrats on the State Board of Education are writing these rules. Delegate Espinoza is exactly right. Every other agency goes through the process. When we pass legislation, they have the authority to promulgate rules. Those rules are subject to the legislature's approval. The State Board of Education and the Department of Education should be no different than that. This isn't micromanaging school boards or classrooms. This is giving the elected officials, those that are responsive to the people, those that are elected by the people, and those that if don't do the job that the people elect them to do can be voted out. There is no recourse for the state school board if they do something that parents are not pleased with. They are appointed by the governor, and voters and parents across the state have absolutely no say in who is on that state school board. And I think that's why it's incredibly important that if you want to empower parents and if you want an education system that is accountable to parents, you should absolutely vote for Amendment 4.
Thank you, Delegate. For our next question, charter schools are opening at a record rate in West Virginia. Do you support charter schools, and what legislative action, if any, is needed for charter schools? Starting with you, Delegate Barrett.
Thanks again, Mike. I've supported the expansion of charter schools in West Virginia. I think if anything needs to be done, we probably need to look at the implementation process a little bit. I think there are some communication issues between local school boards and some of the charter schools. Obviously, this legislation was created prior to any charter schools being open. Obviously, now that charter schools are open, I think we need to work closely with them to find out what hurdles they had, what barriers they had, and how we can make it more efficient of a process so that we can continue to provide that option to parents.
Thank you, Delegate. Senator Geffer.
Thank you. I think that you have to remember that charter schools are really limited to a certain class of people. If you have to go to work every day and be there by 8 o'clock, you can't necessarily drive your students to the charter school. And there's not bus provisions, although I think our charter schools, some of them would like the public system to provide them with school buses. That doesn't exist. So who can go to charter schools is very much limited. I also think it's a mistake to be pulling out public school money and putting it in really a private school context. It is important for our communities to have our children educated and know each other. And we don't want to set up a series, in my mind, I don't think it would be good to set up a series of private schools where you're going to kids who are just like you. I think it's important that you go to schools with people who are different from you, who have different backgrounds and have different life experiences. I think that will make our students, as they grow up, more capable of dealing in the wider world, not just with people who are just like themselves.
Thank you. Delegate Hurst.
Thank you. I support charter schools. And again, they're not for everybody, but they are for some people. Again, we're back to let's reimagine education in the state of West Virginia, because what we have clearly has not been working, clearly it's been failing. Under COVID, the performance reports that I've seen are horrid. Charter schools should be another piece of the puzzle, I think, along with the Hope Scholarship, charter schools. I have heard there may be a few little kinks in the charter schools, and we can look at that and we can adjust things if needed. And I'm not sure how much legislation needs to be done for that. Some of it, I think, is perhaps some resistance to not wanting to support charter schools by certain entities. But again, reimagine our education system. What we've had is one big entity in our education system, one thing for everybody. One size doesn't fit all. So let's reimagine the process, give other options for parents to explore other ideas or other avenues for their children that may work better for them. Certainly our public schools are part of the equation, and certainly these school choices are as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Espinoza.
Thank you again, Mike. Again, was very honored to co-sponsor our first public charter school legislation that was enacted back in 2019, House Bill 206, and was also pleased to enact the charter school legislation that expanded the availability and expanded the options available through the public charter school program back in 2021. You know, I think it's a little foolhardy to suggest that our children and our parents should not have the same options that 44 other states in the District of Columbia have across this country. And again, just very pleased that we've not only been able to enact enabling legislation, but we have seen several charters begin to utilize that recently obtained freedom. I'm also very excited to hear from talking with some of the administrators up at the West Virginia Academy in Monongalia County that they're already starting to see some positive results from traditional public schools, that as a result of some of the offerings that they're offering at the new public charter school, some of the traditional public high schools are now beginning to offer similar programs because they realize that if they want to attract and retain students, they have to offer a quality education program. So those folks that suggest that having public charter schools is somehow going to detract from traditional
15
schools,
seconds.
the evidence does not support that. And the best thing about public charter schools, again, is the accountability. If a public charter school does not perform, it ultimately can be closed. And that is the ultimate accountability.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Clark.
Yes. House Bill 2012. Again, I co-sponsored the bill. But more importantly, I actually graduated from a charter school. And I was not one of those students that Senator Geffer said that was exceptional. I grew up on welfare. I had issues in classes. So, but this charter school taught me something that a traditional high school would not have. It taught me a trade. I ultimately continued to go on to college, but I had a trade in my back pocket. And I know for a fact that our Eastern Panhandle Preparatory Academy has a wide, diverse student population, from kids that have IEPs to kids that are excelling and gifted and talented. It is a wide range of students. Legislatively wise, we need to make a change to something we did not foresee. We need to work on the funding of the school in the setup part. So basically right now we're asking the schools, the parent company, go out and set up this school, buy all the material, the books, the desks, all the other stuff, and wait for their funding that comes in January. We need to give them some of the percentage of that funding up early, and then offset it based off of their January payment, so they can pay for things, desks, curriculum, computers, the things that they need to effectively run the school. I know both of the schools, the Morgan Academy and the Eastern
15
Panhandle
seconds.
Academy, have both their parent companies have significantly put out a lot of money, $400,000 in the first 3 months just to get it up and started. So it's something that I've already started addressing with our education department. So it's something that we'll fix for the future charter schools. But I hope there's
Thank you, Delegate.
many.
Thank you. Mr. Redenauer.
Yes, I absolutely support charter schools. I want to make sure that we actually have better schools for our students, and charter schools is another opportunity for us to develop a educational system that will enhance our overall education for our kids. I think we should try and make, as Delegate Clark was speaking of, an easier development process for our charter schools. I would actually like to increase the number of charter schools that are available throughout the state, because I think this is an important component of a overarching educational system. I think we should be looking at focused charter schools, potentially focusing on vocational training, so that we can actually prepare a lot of our kids for a life in the future in terms of careers, things that they will be able to use. Again, as Delegate Clark alluded to, he had some training and it helped prepare him for life, and that's something I'd like to see us do. I think that charter schools and homeschooling provide some competition to our public schools, and I don't think that we should ever be afraid of competition. I believe personally that competition actually brings out excellence. It forces people to adapt. It forces people to try to do a better job at the mission that they're trying to engage in. So I think we should try and expand our charter schools and see if not necessarily pit them against public schools, but try and encourage our public schools to reach those levels of excellence that we should be demanding from our overall education system. So I will continue to try and support charter schools and any other type of school choice for parents and for our kids.
15 seconds.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Redenauer. For our next question, the national phenomenon of school shootings is tragic and horrifying. Recent shootings have endangered political discourse about school security. What is needed to improve school security in West Virginia, and what legislative action on school security would you support? Starting with you, Mr. Redenauer.
I spent about 16 years conducting anti-terrorism and counterterrorism missions in the Department of Defense and in the Marine Corps. I actually went out on a large number of what we called strategic integrated vulnerability assessments, where we assessed the threat of terrorism to Department of Defense facilities in a wide variety of countries. Usually these weren't military bases, these were usually small facilities, to include some schools, areas where we had Department of Defense personnel with their children in either American schools or in local school systems. Based on that background, what I can tell you is that what we used to do as a technique was to find a way to make our locations harder than any other potential targets that those terrorists might try and attack. And that's what I think we need to be doing with our school systems. We need to try and make our schools hard enough that no gunman is going to consider coming into those schools to try and conduct any kind of an attack against our children or against the teachers or staff. One of the ways that I think we need to be doing that is to arm our teachers as necessary and as they feel that they are capable of handling weapons. I think staff also should be armed, and not just teachers. I also believe that we need to ensure that we have physical security, including locks, the appropriate barriers that would prevent individuals from accessing schools and trying to get into those areas, and also that we need increased training for our law enforcement officials and first responders so that they can react to that type of situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Clark.
Right. So you're going to hear all kinds of things, increase spending on festivals and do all this other security stuff as much as you can. And I agree with all of that. Keep in mind, Uvalde, the student actually came in the back door. Now, Surprisingly, I didn't co-sponsor this one, but I did pass it out of Education, House Bill 2364, teacher carry. How important, or what would have happened if Uvalde had a teacher who was trained and carrying the day that child walked in? Would it have stopped? We don't know. Could it have stopped? Absolutely. What kind of difference would have been made? We don't know. Could there have been a difference made? Absolutely. The teacher carry bill, it's a voluntary bill. It's voluntary for the teacher who feels they're ready to protect the students in that school. They go and they go through all the proper training. And if there is a active shooter situation, they are ready to protect not only their kids in their classroom, but every other kid in that school. There is a trigger in regards to the police knowing who is the concealed carrier in that school. The only people who know is the person carrying the gun, the principal, and the police. It is a very well-written bill. I would love to see it come back out. It will probably come back through education again, and this time let's hope we get it through the floor and get it through Senate and make it become law. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Espinoza.
Thank you, Mike. When you consider the amount of ARPA monies and CARES Act dollars that have flowed to West Virginia, it's staggering. And whether you are supportive of that funding or not, one of the things that I've certainly pressed for during these last couple of years, during the period where we've had these dollars, is to try to make sure that those dollars that are flowing to West Virginia, that we're using those in the best way possible. And I sometimes say that, when you look back in 10 years, my goal is to make sure that we can look back in 10 years and say, this is what we did with the money and this is what we accomplished. And, I sometimes believe that perhaps those dollars are not being spent as wisely as we could. And while I was pleased to hear recently that I believe it was $2 million that's been appropriated, or not appropriated, but at least directed towards hardening schools and trying to make them safer facilities. Frankly, I'd like to see more of those ARPA dollars be used for that purpose, because again, when we look back here in a few years, I'd like to see more than just heaps of disposable masks. I'd really think it would be great if we could devote some of those dollars to hardening our schools, to make it more difficult for a wrongdoer to enter our schools and do harm to our children. So that's one area where I'd like to see additional funding, redirecting existing funding, so that again we have something to show for that, something beneficial to our students. I was very pleased back when I was on House Education to sponsor and work for passage of legislation that makes it easier for school districts to use retired law enforcement officers as resource officers in schools, and certainly encourage our school districts to take advantage of that legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Hurst.
Thank you. Sure. There's a lot here. One thing that we really need to look at, and that's the single point entryway. I think Delegate Clark referred to as his vestibule, where you can lock a intruder between two doors. And what also needs to happen is there needs to be a mechanism of some sort that guarantees that we keep a single point entrance, that back doors are not left ajar or propped open for easy access. That's always the problem with security. Security always tends to get lax because security usually causes extra work for somebody, having to dig keys out of the pocket to open a door or what have you. So that lends to propping doors open quite often. And not just in schools, but this happens pretty much everywhere in secure areas if there is not some sort of protocol in place that guarantees that you maintain those locked entryways. That's part of it. I would actually probably support some sort of armed teachers or armed personnel in schools. And again, we're getting into spending money here, so it's, that puts some limits on us sometimes. I do know the sheriff of Berkeley County, he has a comprehensive plan that he's talked about a little bit with me. Perhaps his plan is worth looking at in the legislature and maybe following along some of that. I believe his plan probably encompasses kind of what we've talked about so far to some degree or another. I think his plan maybe with the armed people is perhaps law enforcement or even retired law enforcement. And I think it's something that we look at. And the bottom line is, if we secure the schools, other areas will become targets. So the bottom line, we need to address some of these people that have problems, especially when they're young.
Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you.
Senator Geffer.
Thank you. I think I'm coming at this from a little different angle. I would say we absolutely need to secure our buildings and our classrooms. We have to harden our public schools. I have no issue with that. But I think if we expect our public school teachers to be carrying weapons and having them in a classroom, that's a whole different level of security for everybody involved. Where are you going to have the gun? Is the teacher going to carry it around with her or himself all day? Are they going to have it locked away someplace and they have to run and get it? So I'm not sure that's, I think we do need security officers at the school, but I'm not sure we can lay that on the teachers. But the other thing I think we really need to work on is instructing our children and all of us that the way to solve problems is not through violence, that there are other ways we can go about creating a productive society and a society where we can all live. Violence should not be the first response to every disagreement that people have, and unfortunately, too many people, that's the way they want to go. And I really think we need to rethink that so that we realize that if a gun is brought into school, it should only be used by people who are really trained on how to use that weapon, and it should be secure within the school. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Barrett.
Every time that I think about this issue, I can't help but think about every courthouse in this state, the state capitol building, and places where we have elected politicians all have armed security. If you walk into the state capitol building, you go through a metal detector, there's armed Capitol Police. When the legislature's in session, there are armed state troopers upstairs outside of both the Senate and House chambers. And it's appalling to me that we don't have a school resource officer in every school in the state. I don't know what the cost of that is, but the way in which government tends to spend money, I think that that is a priority. When the government designates a gun-free zone, then the government has taken the obligation to protect the people in that gun-free zone. And so I think it's absolutely imperative that we have a school resource officer in every school. The West Virginia Department of Homeland Security has a new division. It is the School Safety and Security Division, and they are tasked with detecting, reporting, and investigating school threats more effectively. And while I'm supportive of the concept and the idea, I'm a little concerned that we're not going to coordinate and work with our local sheriff department. I think that we have to empower them with resources so that they can more effectively protect our schools. I think if we have the division that I mentioned from the Department of Homeland Security, that's fine, and with them detecting threats on whether that be online or wherever, I think that's important. But really the folks on the ground are our local sheriff department, and I think that we should give them the resources to protect our students. But when we protect politicians and we don't protect children, we have that incredibly backwards.
Thank you, Delegate. We're going to take a short break here for 4 minutes.
Hi, I am Chuck Hurst, current delegate up for re-election in the 95th District. If re-elected, I will work for locality pay for state workers and continue to support policies that encourage business growth, which creates jobs and grows our economy. I am liberty-minded and will protect our individual rights. We cannot afford to return to failed policies of the past. Let's continue to move West Virginia forward. I humbly ask for your vote on November the 8th. You can find out more at charleshorst.com and follow me on Facebook.
Paid for by the committee to elect Charles Horst.
When will I be able to retire? How do I make the most of the money I have? How do I leave a lasting legacy to my loved ones? I'm Philip McCoy, financial advisor with the Mirius Group, a private wealth advisory practice of Ameriprise Financial Services Incorporated. Call us today at 304-263-4343 to help you make the most of your financial future. Our office is located at 1270 Winchester Avenue, Martinsburg, West Virginia.
Ameriprise Financial Services Incorporated, member FINRA and SIPC.
I'm Jason Barrett. I'm running for state senate because I believe it's time to build an even better West Virginia. That starts with a less burdensome tax policy, reliable internet service, a strong education system, and a robust tourism industry. I believe this building starts right here in Jefferson and Berkeley counties.
I ask for your support and your vote on November 8th.
Paid for by friends of Jason Barrett.
Hello, my name is Wayne Clark. I've learned and accomplished a lot in my first 2 years as your representative in the West Virginia State House of Delegates. I've sponsored or co-sponsored 27 bills that became law in my first term, from education to energy to protecting the Second Amendment and the rights of the unborn to supporting small businesses. I thank you for the faith you had in me to represent you, and I humbly ask for your vote again this November. Wayne Clark, candidate for House of Delegates, District 99, paid for by Clark for WV.
You've been in an accident. The choice of a lawyer may be the biggest decision you make for you and your family's future. At Mansion Ferretti, we offer a free consultation and no fees until we win your case. Call us today and protect your future. Mansion Ferretti, when you need justice.
Hi, I'm Susan Benzinger, candidate for the new District 100 in the West Virginia House of Delegates. I support high-speed internet for every house, school, and business, clean water to drink for agriculture, for tourism, public education, including locality pay for teachers and staff. If you send me to Charleston, I will represent all of us in District 100. I ask you for your vote on November 8th, paid for by Susan Benzinger for delegate, Raymond B. Benzinger, treasurer.
The Honda Civic and the Accord are uniquely stylish in their own way. But you know what they have in common? Reliability and comfort? Sure. Available turbocharged engines? Of course. But also, the driver, having fun for no reason, except for the thrill of driving a Honda, America's most loved auto brand.
CMA's Honda of Winchester, 3985 Valley Pike. CMA, moving lives forward.
2021 American Customer Satisfaction Index ACSI survey of customers rating the performance of their own automobiles.
When I was in high school, I was a troubled kid. Hannah Geffer took me into her family and treated me like her son. Today, I'm a U.S. Army veteran, a college graduate, and have a successful job. Hannah Geffer doesn't just talk about caring for children, she does it. She did it for me. Vote to keep Hannah Geffer as your state senator. She will take care of you too.
Thank you again, everyone. For our next question here, during the COVID-19 pandemic, many local school systems imposed requirements for students to wear protective gear such as masks. Some school boards cited public health authorities such as local health boards or the CDC to provide rationale for these decisions. In your view, how should school boards work with public health institutions on issues such as wearing protective gear? Which government institutions, if any, have the authority to impose requirements for our students? Starting with you, Delegate Barrett.
Thanks, Mike. Well, I think the local school boards should have that authority, provided that there's a real health emergency. If there is an absolute emergency, then I think that the local health board then should have some authority, but that should be in a emergency, short-term time frame. I mean, it's not something that I think that local health boards should have long-term oversight and long-term restrictions on schools. Again, local health boards are unelected bureaucrats as well. Local school board members are elected, and so I think that those are the folks that should have the ultimate decision.
Thank you. Senator Geffer?
Well, I think they would be the ones who have the ultimate decision, but I think it's appropriate for the public health services and CDC to give guidance to the school systems, because the teachers aren't trained, most of the teachers aren't trained as medical professionals. So I think it's appropriate that the schools consult with the medical professionals in our community, and that would be the public health services and the CDC. That seems appropriate to me.
Thank you. Delegate Hurst.
Thank you. I tend to agree with Delegate Barrett there on his assessment. And the legislature basically clarified this already, that the health department can institute an emergency order if the situation requires, but within 30 days, that order would have to be voted on and or approved by the County Board of Education, and also the local school boards have authority also, and that's how it should be, and I believe that's what the legislature has done already at this point. It puts the actual final decision upon elected officials, whether it's the school board or whether it's the county council. An emergency order can go into effect immediately if that's the case, and within 30 days the county council has to approve that order or not approve it, depending on circumstances, I guess. But the bottom line is accountability again. It falls to somebody that is elected, somebody that can be held accountable by the people for the decisions that are made. And I think we've got that squared away. I think we got that right at this point. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Espinoza?
Mike, I agree with my three legislative colleagues that ultimately elected officials should make that call, and certainly they should avail themselves to the best advice and guidance, both at a federal and a state and county level. But ultimately, elected officials should make that call. That's one of the reasons why I supported legislation to ensure that those rules and regulations that are promulgated by our county health departments and other local health departments are ultimately ratified by elected officials. While again, I certainly respect our healthcare professionals, ultimately those decisions should be reviewed and ratified and approved by elected officials so that they can be accountable to the public.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Clark.
So I'm going to continue on the trend. Elected officials should be making these decisions on whether or not we have an emergency or we have a pandemic or we have a situation. And the reason why is because elected officials represent an X number of folks. We each represent 18,000 people. So we're asked to speak on their behalf of those 18,000 people when we make a decision, just like all the way down each of the lines of government. But when it comes to protective gear, when it comes to masks and such, I think it's up to the parents. The parents have to make the decision on whether or not they feel it's necessary for their child to have a mask on 24/7. Or they have to have, a helmet on or gloves on or whatever the situation may be in regarding to that situation. Now, if it's to the point, I can tell you that if it's to the point where my kids have to go to school wearing a mask and gloves and have to be desanitized when they enter or leave that school, guess what? They're not going to school, because that means that that situation is worse than it could than imaginable, and that school should be closed and cleaned and desanitized. But when we were looking at specifically the COVID-19 situation, and if my kids did not want to wear a mask and they went to me and said, Daddy, you know what, I don't mind, I don't care, I don't think we're not going to get, whatever their reasoning, and I say that they don't have to wear it, then they don't have to wear it. So let the parents make the choice on what's going on with their kids.
Thank you. Mr. Ridenhour.
Yes, I believe that parents should be the ones who have the primary control over what goes on with their children. I don't believe that we should be mandating anything to those parents. That's their children. They should have the choice and should be making those choices. I believe, frankly, that many of our public health institutions have discredited themselves at the national level in the eyes of the people. Most of the vaccine and mask mandates that we saw imposed upon our public really were not based upon either sound science or really a good understanding of the public health situations at the time. They were in many cases either emotional or political decisions. And I believe that we need to revisit how we impose those types of mandates on our public. We should be investigating what caused those decisions to be made and why we in fact made those types of decisions. We need to make sure that our public health officials are apolitical, that they are focused principally upon ensuring that our children and our people are in fact protected against the types of diseases that we may face in the future. I think that we do need to ensure that our local school boards are working with our local public health officials, with our county commissions, and I think our county commissions should be involved in this process as well, because I consider them to be probably the best representatives of the people in the county. So the county commissions, the local school boards should consult the local public health officials and try and come up with the best solution. But again, it should come down to what the parents want, because the parents are the people who should be making decisions for their children. Thank you.
Thank you. In Jefferson County, public school teachers are paid less than teachers in Loudoun County, Virginia, and Washington County, Maryland. Many local teachers cross into neighboring states to earn a higher salary. The legislature allowed for locality pay, which is the right to pay teachers at local market rates, in 2019. Teacher unions have historically opposed locality pay as a tool to raise local teacher pay in Jefferson County. What is your view of locality pay, and how should it be applied? Are there further legislative steps that are needed, and what actions would you support? Starting with Mr. Ridenhour.
I absolutely support locality pay. I understand that the teachers' unions have some serious differences with that, and they want to try and raise the pay for all teachers in the state. That then would not work in particular in Berkeley and Jefferson counties. I believe that we should recharacterize this as cost of living allowances. I think we should be looking at the way that the federal government looks at the Jefferson and Berkeley County areas, and that we should be trying to base our decisions in part on how the federal government has been looking at cost of living allowances in our area. I will work with other delegates if I am elected to try and get cost of living allowances and locality pay for the teachers, police officers, state workers in our area. It's not just about teachers, it is about those other professions that are supporting the people of the Eastern Panhandle. So that's something that I want to take to heart and want to try and make sure that we're doing the best we can for our teachers and ensure that we're actually paying them what they deserve and making sure that we can keep the teachers that are doing a great job for us in our state and not have them simply be trained to go to other counties and other states. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Clark.
So of course I'm going to vote in favor of locality pay. We tried to get locality pay as a pilot last legislative session in regards to our state troopers, and ultimately we agreed on paying all of our state troopers a salary increase. But I want to talk about how we determine what the locality is. I mean, obviously, looking at border counties, but you want to look at specifically in the federal government, in a previous life, I was in the mortgage industry, and Federal Housing Association (FHA) has what's called MSAs, and those MSAs, they direct the lenders on what the maximum lendability on an FHA loan in regards to the value of the home, and they vary by MSAs, and they vary by county. Jefferson County is a little bit more than Berkeley County. Berkeley County is a lot more than Morgan County, and it trends down. So when you look at how your federal government's already looking at, okay, well, you can qualify for a house at this amount of money, and this is how much you can pay, for a house, 175, 200, 225, whatever it is. But then you have two teachers in the education system, well, they don't qualify because they don't make enough money to qualify to buy a house through the federal government's housing authority association. So why are we not doing the same thing in regards to how we pay it? I've looked at that funding formula for the last 3 years, and I'll continue to look at it and try and figure out how do we make this work.
15 seconds.
And I want to see locality pay based off of whether it's a federal government program or MSAs or just by border counties, but it's got to be something.
Thank you. Delegate Espinoza.
Well, thank you again, Mike. I certainly do support locality pay and have worked very hard with my colleagues in the legislature to try to enact some form of locality pay or housing allowance to address the inequity that clearly exists. The inequity of having someone who works in an area like the Eastern Panhandle with much higher cost of living than someone in a less populated area of West Virginia, and certainly would encourage our educators and school service personnel to lobby their representatives to support locality pay. I think we have begun to make some progress in a few areas. For example, we did enact some legislation within the last few years to allow payment of a supplemental to CPS workers, which is another area where we're seeing a big challenge, particularly in growth areas like the Eastern Panhandle. As I believe Delegate Clark noted, we've been working very hard to try to bring our correctional workers up, particularly in areas where it's becoming increasingly difficult to staff our correctional facilities. And I think one of the things that will help us over time is to continue to pick up legislative seats here in some of the growth areas that are experiencing some of these challenges. And I think by having a couple additional delegates now, that will continue to help us get closer and closer to the numbers that we'll need in order to ultimately enact some locality type legislation. It's really more of a regional issue than I think even a partisan issue. I think that's one of the challenges,
15 seconds.
I think we are making some progress, and certainly look forward to working with my legislative colleagues to finally enact some locality pay to address this very, very important issue.
Thank you. Delegate Hurst.
Thank you, Mike. I think you're going to find that the whole Eastern Panhandle delegation in Charleston recognizes this problem and is working on the problem. And I believe the conversation has gotten started. I don't believe the conversation is going to go away. I think we're going to get there. I'm not quite sure exactly what it's going to look like yet. There's some hurdles to overcome. As Delegate Espinoza mentioned, it's more regional than anything. So there's some pushback from more rural areas of the state on this. They kind of want to get something for their people as well. But it's an issue for across the board for our state workers. And what I mean by state workers, I include teachers in that category. And again, it's one size doesn't fit all, kind of like our education. One big size, that one same thing doesn't fit everybody. And we're seeing that with locality pay. I believe we get there. I'm not quite sure what it's going to look like yet, but it's being pushed. The conversation started, and like I say, it's not going to go away. As it is right now, Department of Highways is understaffed in the Eastern Panhandle, probably going to stay understaffed. They cannot compete with what a cashier at a convenience store gets paid. So it's a problem. We have to get it addressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree with my colleagues. We have a different situation in this area. Our teachers should be paid the market rate for educators in this area. It's not just our teachers. We lose teachers, we lose nurses, we lose social workers, the police. Other states surrounding us are paying our people a lot more. Of course, they want to be able to support their families. So I really think that teachers should be paid at a market rate for this area. The passage of House Bill 206 in 2019 was a start, but it really didn't close the gap enough. The difference between wages in West Virginia and Maryland and Virginia is as much as $20,000 a year. And that's not for teachers who've been there 50 years. That's for the starting teachers. You have that kind of differential. We do have a surplus now. I think we should invest in our schools. They're the key for everything we're doing. And paying teachers is really an investment in our young people. We want to keep our experienced teachers here. We don't want them whisked away to Virginia and Maryland. We want to keep them here, and we've got to pay them to do that.
Thank you. Delegate Barrett.
Thank you. I absolutely support locality pay. I think that we move the needle on locality pay more this session than we have in my 8 years in the legislature. I was the lead sponsor of the bill dealing with that would provide locality pay for correction workers. Unfortunately, it didn't make it across the finish line. I sponsored was co-sponsor of the locality pay for state troopers, which ultimately became a $10,000 pay raise for all troopers, and certainly it's deserved, and we could afford to do that for 641 state troopers. We can't do that for the number of teachers that we have across this state. I think that we have to continue to provide pay raises to teachers and all state workers. I think with the inflation that you're seeing coming out of the administration in Washington, it's harder and harder for our state workers to be able to survive. We certainly know they're not going to thrive, but we at least need them to be able to survive. And so I think that when we provide another 5% pay raise for our teachers and for all of our state workers, I think that is the place for an amendment to include some locality pay, whether that's a straight pay increase for certain areas based on the housing index or some other formula, or if we do a housing allowance. And I think that with the power that we have in the legislature from the Eastern Panhandle, I think that we should be insistent on having either a housing allowance or a pay increase for locality pay in any 5% pay raise that we do for teachers and state workers.
Thank you. State legislatures around the country have passed or introduced anti-critical race theory bills or laws banning the teaching of divisive concepts in public schools, including in West Virginia. In your view, should the legislature take action relevant to critical race theory concepts or other divisive concepts in public school curricula? And if so, what laws would you support to expand or restrict teaching on these topics in public schools? Starting with you, Delegate Barrett.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Well, I supported Senator Rucker's bill this year dealing with CRT. The bill died, I believe, on the last day of session. It was amended in the House, went back to the Senate, and I believe the Senate simply ran out of time. I think that that one race and one gender is not superior to another. I think that's fairly fundamental. I don't know how anybody could argue with that point. I think that the education system in West Virginia has taken notice of that bill, even though it didn't pass. And I think that if CRT or provisions that are taught within CRT are in our public schools, then the legislature needs to act. And I would certainly be supportive of that legislation again.
Thank you. Senator Geffer.
Well, I think first we ought to define what CRT is. What is critical race theory? I think different people have very different ideas about it. Critical race theory is a legal concept that is taught at law schools. We're not teaching it to our fourth graders. So I think that's something we should consider. There's this this concept that we don't want to teach things that are uncomfortable. How do we talk about the history of our country if we don't recognize that some people were enslaved? That's an uncomfortable concept. That's a concept that nobody should feel comfortable with. We can't just ignore it and say we're only going to teach things that make our kids feel happy. They have to have a realistic understanding of our history. And the argument that I made on the floor of the Senate is, it's not that we want to blame our forefathers. What we want to look at is, look how far we've come. Let's remember what we were like in 1776 versus where we are now. We should be proud of where we've come. It used to be that only men who had gold or silver to pay their taxes were allowed to vote. We don't have that now. That's a good thing. We have progressed. We have not come to what Martin Luther King sometimes refers to as the beloved community, but we should be moving toward that our children have a realistic understanding of our history, but we should be really proud of where we've gone from where we began. Women, we did not have the right to vote. I'm very proud that my granddaughter,
15 seconds.
My granddaughter is not going to have to worry about that, I hope, that she will still have the right to vote, which her great-grandmother did not have.
Thank you. Delegate Hurst.
Thank you. I don't recall what the bill number was, but I'll refer to it as Senator Rucker's bill. I supported that in committee. I supported it on the floor. And as Delegate Barrett mentioned, it died out in the Senate. I think they actually had to vote on it, but it was a few seconds or so after time expired. Critical race theory. I don't know. That's come to encompass so much. I mean, I agree we want to teach the history as what history was. I think what the problem we run into is we have some that starts teaching it in such a manner that they teach it in a way that certain ones are oppressed, others become the oppressor. That's not what we should do. That's not what we need to do. And then also I think there's some of this transgender stuff falls into there as well. With I don't know. I guess we've talked about teaching fourth graders this kind of crazy sex stuff with transgenders and what have you. And I refer to it as crazy because it doesn't belong being taught to a fourth grader. That's not age appropriate whatsoever. So I'm not quite sure what legislation needs to be done or what we can do. The simple fact remains, whenever we're teaching some of the history of this country, it's easy for a teacher to put their particular spin on it. And that's what we really don't want to see. I'm fine with teaching things as they were, but leave the particular spin off of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Espinoza.
Mike, I also was pleased to support the Anti-Racism Act of 2022, and I think it's important to understand what that bill actually said and what it did not say, as my Senate colleague has suggested. It simply indicates that a teacher cannot compel a student to adhere to any of the following concepts. One, that race is inherently, morally, or intellectually superior to another race. Can't compel them, an individual, by virtue of the individual's race, that they are inherently racist or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. It can't compel an individual that they should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely, partly because of the individual's race. That an individual's moral character is determined by the individual's race, or an individual, by virtue of the individual's race, bears responsibility for actions committed by other members of the same race. If that's controversial, I don't understand why it's controversial. Some folks will try to misconstrue what the legislation says. It doesn't prevent the teaching of history. What it says is that you cannot compel a student to engage in one of those type of beliefs, which I think most of us should be able to say is really not the type of society that we want here in West Virginia. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Delegate Clark.
So I did support Senator Rucker's bill, Senate Bill 498 on the floor, but also was a co-sponsor of House Bill 4011, which was the companion bill, the anti-racism bill that came through the House. And just like my colleague, Mr. Delegate Espinosa, just said about what was in the meat of the bill. Critical race theory, however you want to call it, the diversity, equity, inclusion, all of the, we need to teach, and you hear it all the time. I don't want to teach because you're telling me how I got to do my job. I don't want to be a teacher because you're telling me I can't do this. No, here's what we need. We need you to go into the school and teach our kids how to think, not what to think. Teach them how to think on their own and make their own decisions. Don't tell my kids that they're inherently racist because they're white. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Radnauer.
Yeah, I believe that CRT and other divisive concepts should be eliminated from our school systems. We should not be focused on political agendas or indoctrination of our children. This is something that we need to be basically of like mind on. Frankly, we need to teach our actual history and not many of the ahistorical or anti-historical theories of the likes of Howard Zinn and his Marxist people's history of the United States. We need to actually teach history the way that it occurred, with all of its warts, with all of its faults, with all of the successes, the failures that we saw, the victories that were achieved, the defeats, everything. Not the types of agendas that we're seeing that have been instituted inside of our educational system in order to promote certain political agendas that don't have any place in our educational system. I believe that we have to have a government that is of the people and by the people, and we need to ensure that our kids understand that history. I think we need to expand the amount of history and government that we teach in our schools, and we need to make sure that our kids understand that we have had problems and that we will try and overcome those problems together as a people. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, candidates and representatives, that concludes all the questions that we had prepared for you guys tonight as part of this forum. You'll now be given 2 minutes for closing statements, starting with Delegate Barrett.
Well, thank you, Mike, and again, thank you to We the People. Thank you to WRNR. Thank those that are here this evening and those watching on YouTube. I think there's a very clear difference in your choice in the 16th Senatorial District. You can choose to go down the road of status quo, where we're 48th and 49th in education, down the road of not empowering parents and teachers, down the road of continuing to empower bureaucrats. Or you can make a change in this election, and that's why I'm asking for your support. This is education is one of the most important topics facing West Virginia. It's been said that companies don't come here unless we have an educated workforce, and that's a true statement. We all believe that. We can have the best tax policy in the world. You can have so many things. You can have all the infrastructure you want, but if you don't have educated workforce, companies won't locate here. It's been suggested on numerous times that school choice is the enemy of public education, and that's couldn't be further from the truth. That if we continue to do what we do, or what we've done, we're going to continue to get what we've always got. And we rank 48th and 49th. We have to do better with public education. I am supportive of pay raises for teachers. I am supportive of limiting the amount of administration so that we can funnel money actually into the classroom and help students. It's very clear that we have this top-heavy run education system in West Virginia. And I think that if we continue down the path of electing liberal members, that's what we're going to continue to have. And so that's why I'm asking for your support. Like I said, I will always stand up to help empower parents and empower teachers and not to empower bureaucrats.
Thank you. Senator Geffer.
Well, I find it interesting. I'm not sure everybody was actually listening to the conversations tonight. I don't think that you heard people talking quite about what Jason was saying, but we have a different view on things. I think it's important that we remember that our schools are absolutely crucial to everything we do. We want to have the best possible schools we can have, and that when you're looking at how to do that, if you know something about pedagogy, students learn differently. And we have to have a situation where we have a proper student-to-teacher ratio and assistance in our schools. What we didn't talk about tonight, for example, are our special ed students. Very often, they're grouped in one classroom, and there's only one aide. That makes it almost impossible for the teacher to really work with each student. So I would suggest that we have a lot of dedicated teachers. I would remind you that they were the EMS workers for our children during the pandemic, and that they did the best they could. They learned new skills. They learned how to use computers to teach over, which they hadn't been doing before, and that there's really nothing more important than our children getting a good education so that they can thrive here and so that they could go out in the world and participate in a variety of careers that we hope will be available to them.
Thank you. Delegate Hurst.
Thank you, Mike. Change is uncomfortable a lot of times. We've seen change in the past number of years. We've seen improvements in the state. We've seen improvements in the business climate. I think we need to stay on that path, continue moving forward, and change in education is not going to be bad. I firmly believe that we're getting on the right path. And change is always uncomfortable. Everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but most tend to resist change because it's different. They don't know what it's going to do. It creates a bit of fear. I think we need to stay on the path that we're on right now. We've been creating record revenue surpluses, which is a plus. Some of that is the energy sector, I guess. A large portion of it is, but not all of it. If we look backwards to pre-pandemic, West Virginia was, I believe, #1 in the nation on economic recovery at the time. If it wasn't #1, we were very near the top. But if I recall correctly, we were #1. Has been continuing to change the foundation of the state of West Virginia. We continue moving down this. Let's continue to move the state forward, continue with the current policies that we've enacted, and continue growth for the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Espinoza.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks to you, We the People, for hosting this forum, and WRNR, who's not only facilitating tonight's very important education forum, but thank you for your continuing coverage of current events and the legislature on a day-to-day basis. If you look at our state budget, roughly a $4.7 billion general revenue budget, somewhere in the range of 45% of that general revenue budget goes to public education. If you look at what West Virginians are investing in public education, they are extremely generous in their investments in public education. But as Delegate Barrett has pointed out, unfortunately, we're not seeing those results. And again, I've certainly been more than happy to support 3 5% aggregate pay raises for our state teachers, school service personnel, and other state employees. But certainly our citizens, our parents, and our children, they deserve to see results. And I think really it really starts off with expanded accountability, greater accountability, and that's why I'm such a proponent of Amendment 4 to place the final decision-making, the final accountability in elected officials who, as others have pointed out, if they aren't responsive to parents and students, then they can ultimately be voted out of office. So again, certainly encourage you to support Amendment 4. In the House, we currently have 78 members. All indications are we'll probably get into the 80s. In the Senate, frankly, that's been a little bit of where our challenge has been with some of our education reform policies. And I think we have seen a clear difference here this evening. I would encourage you to also support a Senate candidate that will work with the House in choosing students over unelected bureaucrats. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Clark.
Well, again, thank you, we the people. Thank you, WNR&R. Thank you for those who showed up. Brief talk about myself. I'm a small business owner. I work a lot. My wife can tell you. My kids can tell you. I work many hours. I work hard. I always come home feeling like I've gotten nothing done. I always go back the next day and get done what I got to get done the day before. And I keep on that process every day. And I do that when I'm in Charleston. I show up. I work. I didn't go down to Charleston to pass a bunch of bills out of the House. I didn't go down to Charleston to co-sponsor a bunch of bills. You know, I was excited to talk about today about all the bills that I co-sponsored that passed and became law. Many of us up here have an opponent. I don't want to talk about Republican, Democrat, or whatever. I want to talk about this. In the 99th district, do you want to vote on the person that shows up? Or you want to vote on someone who doesn't show up? I'm going to show up and I'm going to work. So I hope that you come out and you vote for me, whether you're Republican or Democrat or Independent. Because you know, when I get to Charleston, I'm going to go down there and work and get stuff done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ridenauer.
Yeah, I consider it unfortunate that my opponent decided not to show up today. I hope to be able to engage her at some point in a debate. As I stated earlier, I believe education is critical for our children and for their families. Our educational system has deteriorated over the past decade. It's not improving at a sufficient rate to keep up with the economic development we're experiencing and anticipate in the future. About 1,000 families in my district do not have their kids in our Jefferson County school system. These families are voting with their feet. They're fleeing a school system that they see as a failure and failing themselves, their families, and their children. We need to increase the vocational training that we have for our students so that we can prepare them for jobs that can eventually lead to careers that they can then be able to excel in and hopefully be able to turn into something where they can raise their own families. We need to increase our school choice for parents. We need to ban any sexualization of kids in our schools. This is something that we need to make sure that we are not trying to indoctrinate children into a system where they are eventually going to create harm to themselves. We need to ban CRT and any other political agendas. We must increase the quality of our education. These are your kids, not the government's. The choices should be yours. They shouldn't be the government's choices. I'll work to that end, and I'll make sure that our families are my priority. I hope that the people of the district will go ahead and send me to Charleston because I want to work with the other delegates and with senators to try and increase the quality of our educational system and see what we can do to make sure that this is a much greater state. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our forum on education policy for the citizens of Jefferson County. I thank all of our legislative officials and candidates here for taking their time out of their schedule and being here tonight, and we wish you the best of luck come November.
Hi, I am Chuck Hurst, current delegate up for re-election in the 95th District. If re-elected, I will work for locality pay for state workers and continue to support policies that encourage business growth, which creates jobs and grows our economy. I am liberty-minded and will protect our individual rights. We cannot afford to return to failed policies of the past. Let's continue to move West Virginia forward. I humbly ask for your vote on November the 8th. You can find out more at charleshorst.com and follow me on Facebook.
Paid for by the committee to elect Charles Horst.
I'm Jason Barrett. I'm running for state senate because I believe it's time to build an even better West Virginia. That starts with a less burdensome tax policy, reliable internet service, a strong education system, and a robust tourism industry. I believe this building starts right here in Jefferson and Berkeley counties.
I ask for your support and your vote on November 8th.
Paid for by friends of Jason Barrett.
Hello, my name is Wayne Clark. I've learned and accomplished a lot in my first 2 years as your representative in the West Virginia State House of Delegates. I've sponsored or co-sponsored 27 bills that became law in my first term, from education to energy to protecting the Second Amendment and the rights of the unborn to supporting small businesses. I thank you for the faith you had in me to represent you, and I humbly ask for your vote again this November. Wayne Clark, candidate for House of Delegates, District 99, paid for by Clark for WV.
Hi, I'm Susan Benzinger, candidate for the new District 100 in the West Virginia House of Delegates. I support high-speed internet for every house, school, and business, clean water to drink for agriculture, for tourism, public education, including locality pay for teachers and staff. If you send me to Charleston, I will represent all of us in District 100. I ask you for your vote on November 8th, paid for by Susan Benzinger for delegate, Raymond B. Benzinger, treasurer.
When I was in high school, I was a troubled kid. Hannah Geffer took me into her family and treated me like her son. Today, I'm a U.S. Army veteran, a college graduate, and have a successful job. Hannah Geffer doesn't just talk about caring for children, she does it. She did it for me. Vote to keep Hannah Geffer as your state senator. She will take care of you too.